Welcome to the No Hair, All Heart podcast. I am your no hair, very bald host, Mookie Spitz. And the ones with the heart today are Mookie Spitz and Michelle Waugh. Waugh? I always mispronounce her name, which is a disaster given her eagerness to help edit and review my new novel. So Michelle saw a stack of printouts on my living room table. And she said, "What is that?" And I said, "That is a work in progress novel." And then she just started reading. And she kept turning the pages one after the other. And she got into it. So I was like, well, you are a tutor. You are a teacher. You are a doctorate level educated person. And I would love your feedback. Anything that you want to share, I will listen and take into account. And that's what I did. So one thing led to another. She literally reviewed the entire first draft and second draft. And it got drafty, the drafts that she was looking at. And everything from a missing period or a typo to one of my 3-line paragraphs that wasn't quite clear to sections that might have been a little bit ambiguous for the readers. There's also a section with a relationship between two young women. And I wasn't quite sure if I had the credulity to be able to deliver a convincing narrative. And she assured me that it was convincing. But she also pointed out that I could be doing a little bit more in that section, that I should go for it. So she infused me with confidence, not only in terms of writing about women, but in terms of the overall narrative itself. I wasn't crazy. The book is pretty good. She likes it. It's a science fiction novel. She's not even into science fiction, and she liked it. So I wanted to thank Michelle, but also take it to the next level and empower her with interviewing me on one of my podcasts about my book. So, with that lengthy introduction, I would like to pass the baton to Michelle Waugh. Oh, I just can't get it right. Anyway, Michelle Waugh will be interviewing Mookie Spitz about his new novel, Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine, the first in a series of science fiction adventure novels. Welcome aboard, Michelle. Thank you for taking a hold of this interview, and let it rip.
Hi, I am Michelle Waugh, and I'm here with Mookie Spitz, the author of the series Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine. The first book, The Lover's Guide to the Infiniverse, it was recently released in paperback and Kindle and is available on Amazon.
She's also marketing for me, folks. Isn't that great? Thank you, Michelle. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hi, Mookie. Let's start this interview with a bibliomancy, where you turn to any random page in the book and read the quote.
All right, I love that idea. That's something I like to do. And bibliomancy is basically just picking to any random page, and wherever your eye or finger might direct you, start reading. Neither of them could believe it at first. The idea of finality alien to two voracious dopamine addicts forced into self-induced dependency and damnation. They couldn't live together or apart. There you have it. So I don't think you're dopamine deficient. Do you? I know that I am severely dopamine deficient. I think if you read some of the book, it becomes rapidly self-evident that I am dopamine deficient. But I think that's a neat way to start.
Yes. So, starting there, first of all, where did you get the inspiration for this book?
I must have been 10 or 11 years old, and I had an old Corolla, Corona typewriter. I think it was a Corona typewriter, manual typewriter. And I was learning how to type ASDFJKL semicolon, where to put your fingers, the different letters associated with each finger. And I was in the throes of teaching myself how to type. At the same time, I was also a voracious reader, and I inhaled books. Anything that I got near, I just read and read and read. And my very favorite books of all my favorite books were the science and mathematics essays of Isaac Asimov. And he was a science fiction writer. He's best known for the Foundation science fiction series. Also, an unbelievably prolific writer. I think he's published something like 300, 350 books. By his own admission, he typed 90 words a minute, and he would put in a piece of paper with it had the carbon in it, so it would make a copy of it. And his rule was that a piece of paper could only go through the typewriter 2 times. So he started typing on a sheet of paper, and he had the option to keep it and it would be published, or he would have one more go at it, and that was it. That's how this guy wrote. He was trained as a scientist, a chemist, I believe. He became a voracious writer, and he had a series of math and science essays that I adored. And he would pick a topic and riff on it. And one of his topics was the notion of infinity, mathematical infinity. And if I remember the essay, he summarized its history going all the way back to the Greeks, the way that people have grappled with this idea of a number beyond any other number. And then he went into some of the more contemporary ideas of set theory, how there could be an infinity larger than an infinity. The idea of transfinite numbers, George Cantor, his diagonal theorem, and all that kind of good stuff. And I was mesmerized by this. I was fascinated by the idea of uncountable numbers and numbers bigger than any number we can imagine. But even more so, the physicality of the infinite, that they're numbers we can't even write out. So if every particle in the universe was a zero after a one, they're numbers that are far bigger than even that. So these numbers are so big, they can't even be understood as physical things. And then it got me to thinking about the idea of recurrence. So if the probability that I am sitting there, young Mookie Spitz, at this manual typewriter, typing this story about the infinite as an homage to Isaac Asimov, then if the universe is really, really big, as it seems to be, then chances are out there, sooner or later, there's another Mike Spitz or Mookie Spitz sitting there writing a story about infinity. And if the universe is infinite, then conceivably there's an infinite number of Mookie Spitzes writing an infinite number of stories about infinity. And that's the story I wrote when I was 10 or 11 years old. So fast forward pretty much half a century, here I am, young at heart, and this idea has been percolating in my head ever since. And ever since, science and mathematics and philosophy has come a really, really long way in terms of our understanding of the cosmos, our understanding of particle physics, our understanding of how the universe works. And here's the thing, a lot of those ideas, although it's not experimentally confirmable, and claims are made about the multiverse and about parallel universes and about wormholes and dimensional travel and all this kind of stuff. It's still science fiction. Nothing's been proven. But this idea of the multiverse is at the heart of a lot of thinking. It's at the heart of quantum mechanics. It's at the heart even of quantum computing in terms of how they try to understand the calculations. And it's at the heart of philosophy, going all the way back to Nietzsche and the Indian god Vishnu and the recurring cycles of creation. So I know that's a really long answer, but that's the underpinning of this story, which is what if great novels, and especially great science fiction novels, start with the counterfactual conditional? What if biorhythms are true? What if the dinosaurs weren't wiped out by the asteroid and they survived to live to tell the tale and take over the planet? What if aliens invade? And my series, at least in terms of its backdrop, operates off the idea, the counterfactual idea, which could be true. What if we live in one of an infinite number of universes? And if that's the case, what if everything that's possible becomes real? And what if the life that we live here is repeated in every possible variation over and over again, in infinite variation in this multiverse? And lastly, what does that mean for us in terms of how we see ourselves, our mortality, our morality and ethics, our relationship with each other and ourselves? Does that make our lives meaningless because we're just repeated in an endless number of ways? Or does that make our life particularly special because in this infiniverse of possibility and actuality, wow, here we are. Let's cherish the moment. And that's the underlying zeitgeist and attitude of what went into the book.
Very interesting. Now, my next question is about the cover. The cover is absolutely gorgeous and engaging. Where did you come up with the ideas for the cover?
The cover is done by my very talented niece, Lou Berger, my sister's daughter. She lives in San Diego. I have moved from New York to Orange County as of this August. So I'm even closer to Lou, who's down in San Diego. Lou does wonderful graphic art and artwork. She does it professionally. So it was a logical next step when it came down to creating a cover for my book to recruit Lou. And what we did was riff on the theme. Like, what are we talking about? And I pretty much bloviated as I did earlier in this podcast. And she got very bored very fast when I went on and on about the multiverse and possibility. And my first short story, Lou did not care. Lou's like, what is the book about? And I said, well, this bullshit artist and hustler, this fake inventor who basically gets people excited about inventions that never are created to get a bunch of investor money and research capital and then hit the road and run off with everybody's coins. He gets an idea to create a machine that could jump universes in a multiverse. And then Lou is like, oh, okay, how are we going to represent that? So we went through several drafts, and the initial draft was of a funnel or a wormhole where people could get from one universe to another. And it got a little complicated, and then Lou was like, this is too complicated. And then I said, okay, Lou, let's talk about the device itself. And in the story, Jonnie, whom we'll talk about in a second, hires an actual research scientist to build this thing. She not only believes in it, but thinks that it's doable. And part of it consists of an old school bathtub, with the feet and the sink and the porcelain. And there's two cats in the story. There's a black cat with white mittens, and there's a white cat with black mittens. And she thought that would be cool to put on there. And then I was like, you know what? You have a very iconographic, graphical kind of style, very whimsical and fun. Why don't you put all sorts of stuff associated with this Jonnie character on the cover? You've got dice and money and cigars and joints and bongs and freaky stuff. And she said, sure. So that became the cover, which is two cats jumping around an old school bathtub with a bunch of wires and gizmos sticking out of the bottom, a bunch of whimsical imagery, playing cards, chips for poker, stacks of money, psychedelic mushrooms. And there you have it. That is the cover. She also did it in black and white, and we got closer to publication date. I was like, can you make it colorful? My favorite color is purple, and Jonnie wears lavender in the book, at least when you first meet him. And I was envisioning a much darker purple, and she went with this lighter, very lavendery kind of fuchsia-esque purple. And I personally love it. I think it's great, and I'm glad that you like it too. So that is the cover of Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality, and you actually get a glimpse of the Transfinite Reality Engine, the actual invention. And of note, the book got longer and longer and longer because I have a tendency of just like I bloviate now on podcasts, I tend to type and type and type. So the one book became two books, and the two books became three books, and you don't even get to see the construction of the device in this first novel. So the irony is the Transfinite Reality Engine, at least in abstract form, is on the cover, but it's not in the book itself. So it's a teaser for book number 2, where they actually do build this device. Spoiler alert.
Very nice. My favorite color is purple too.
Well, there you go.
And you spoke about your niece. I noticed that you dedicated your book to your sister, Eva, who is also a writer. How did she help you encourage your writing?
My sister Ava has been a Mookie fan ever since Mookie was a little kid running around. So she has been a wonderful encouragement throughout my whole life. She is arguably the only one who has been convinced since the get go that I am not only a creative person, but a writer. And she always encouraged my writing. I actually sent her this short story that I'm referring to with, Mookie Spitz at a typewriter, infinite Mookie Spitzes. I actually sent that to her when I was 11, and she has been my biggest fan. And she has been disappointed almost, audibly and visibly whenever I veered off the path of actively writing. So my adult life has been kind of like those bumper cars, when you're in a bumper car and then you get close to the edge or another car and it goes boom and then you bounce back. I have oscillated bumper car style, boom, whiplash with writing for decades. There's been intensive periods where all I do is write, and then periods where I pretty much give it up, at least the creative writing, and I just do business writing or other forms. I've been writing continuously, but I haven't been creative writing continuously. And as of the last 2-3 years, the creative writing has reactivated, and it's really built up to a storm. And Ava has been a raging fan, for a ranting fan, ever since the get go. And this book, this is my second novel. My first one I co-wrote with my illustrator friend, Rusty Unisov, Super Santa. That was a collaborative effort. And throughout that effort, I was not only working with another person with their own creative vision, and we basically adapted a screenplay for a film into book format. Not only was I working with another person with their own vision, but I was learning how to write a book. Uh, when you see the finished product of a novel, especially if it's a good novel, just like everything in the arts, it looks effortless and fluid and easy to consume. But that's an illusion. To write a very, very good book is very, very, very hard. And the easier that book is to read, and the more emotionally resonant that book is for you, and the more enjoyable the experience, there's a high probability that the creation of that book was directly proportionally difficult and arduous. So, writing a novel is hard, and we each do it our own way as a writer. So you're up against not only the mechanism of literature itself, like the entropy of the universe, the second law of thermodynamics, that things naturally go to a chaotic state. So you're bringing order to chaos. You're going against the grain of the universe, but you're going against the grain of your own bad habits. So you need to unlearn what you've learned. You need to always be experimenting. You need to be constantly be taking risks. And it's just so intensive. It's so time consuming. So that takes dedication and it takes expertise. So I finally learned how to do it, I think. And my second novel, I think, is me coming into my own as my own writer, and I think I got it. Now, it might be presumptuous of me to assess my own work as a success, but at least from my own vantage point, I consider it a success. Not because it was easy, but because it was especially hard. And it was especially hard in a way where I knew exactly what I wanted to do and I knew exactly how to do it. And it was still hard, which is the biggest lesson and takeaway. As a young writer, as a young artist, you struggle simply knowing what the hell you're supposed to do. How am I going to do this? And you're clutching at straws. You have no real idea how it's going to shake. You don't even know if you're just running in a dead end or you're creating a huge Rube Goldberg device, which is going to collapse inward on itself and it's all bullshit. But I reached the point after Super Santa where I knew how to do it. And that, coupled with the vision of this awesome story, gave me runway to go nuts. And even armed with the knowledge how to write a book, with the book I knew I wanted to write, coupled with the vision of the story, not only did it all come together, but it was hard. It was super difficult. It takes so much work. So I learned all these things, and I have to thank Ava for believing in me and carrying me through. And I'm happy to dedicate it to her. And it's only fitting that the book where I finally came into my own should very much be dedicated to my sister who believed in me from the get-go. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So
very nice.
ode to Ava. Ode to Ava.
Very nice. And my next question is, what is the difference between this book and other sci-fi books you have read?
That's the $64,000 question, and within multiverse terms is the 64 quintillion dollar question, right? Because everything's exponentially more bigly. um, this book is inspired by a few books and writers, but only, I would say, a handful. Definitely Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Even the name, The Lover's Guide to the Infiniverse, which is the name of the series, is obviously derivative of that. And I do it as a mixture of an homage to Douglas Adams, but I also do it because it's so fitting to the theme. Now, how similar is my writing and my book to Douglas Adams? Well, if you flip through my book, not so much. It has a whimsical quality to it. It has a biting sense of cynicism and satire. And it's got the zaniness that you would find in Douglas Adams. But I really believe I have my own style. But Douglas Adams definitely took me to a new place when I read him many, many years ago. And I felt in a sense that he was kind of grinning at me as I was writing this thing. So that's one. So there's similarities in maybe some attitude more than actual execution. The other major science fiction novel that has influenced me or that I have found profound is William Gibson's Neuromancer, which was his first big novel, his first success for sure. This goes back to 1982. Douglas Adams was also 80s, early 80s, I believe. And Neuromancer is far more poetic. I give William Gibson the poetic chops. His prose is much more poetic than mine. It's deep. It's sometimes deliberately ambiguous and flowing. Mine, I think, is more precise and more clinical, if you will, and more direct and action oriented. But from Gibson, I got this flavor of a future that melds technology with humanity. He anticipated the internet, he anticipated virtual reality, he anticipated artificial intelligence. And here's the big thing with William Gibson, he did it in almost a deliberately anachronistic way. So, to cite one example, there's a terrific scene in the novel where the artificial intelligence, the AGI, who is kind of the bad guy of the book, Wintermute, and this is spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read the book, and thank goodness they haven't made a movie because it's such a good book that they're going to ruin it with a movie. But the sentient, all-controlling supercomputer tries to get in touch with the hero of the book. And he's walking down a city street where there's a line of, get this, payphones. He anticipated the internet and virtual reality and artificial intelligence, but not smartphones. And I love that anachronistic kind of quality. And that stuck with me. So that idea of being forward and backward at the same time, I call it over the head and between the legs, influenced me in the sense of capturing that paradox and irony. So, in my view of things and in my writing, you have a blend of the hyper intelligent with the moronically stupid. And this is also a Douglas Adams quality where, when it's fire and ice, it's hot and cold, you're blending things to get an optimal kind of kinetic mix, and I got inspired that way. So these are the similarities where I believe my book is different from most science fiction. And I, not for a second do I mean to shit on any writer, right? I just told you how hard writing is. So if anyone is able to get a book out there, even if it's a self-published vanity project, then more power to you. And I'll be the last person in the world to criticize a writer or a genre. But what I have found in science fiction in particular is what I have described as hate, which is HAITE. Here's an idea, the end. And what that means is science fiction, perhaps more so than most genres in fiction, be they romance, horror, what have you, tends to roll with some super cool idea. Like, what if, remember the counterfactual what if? What if people could actually live on the surface of a neutron star? What if a black hole collides with the Earth? What if aliens invade? And then the whole damn story is about the black hole, about the alien, about the neutron star. That's not literature. That's not fiction. People want to read about other people. So, what I learned the hard way after years of writing is you got to start and end with the characters. And when the characters organically interact with each other, when you're clear as to who they are, what they want, and the obstacles that get in their way, and then you set them loose in this fantastic world, that's the magic. And where my book, I think, differs from a lot of science fiction, it's not just a world creation. It's not just like, oh, gee whiz, there's a multiverse and you get to jump universes and you make a wish that could come true. It's what that means for the characters and what the characters do based on their own motivation and passion to realize their dreams, their goals. And things get in the way, other characters get in the way, and I let the characters loose to do their thing. And that's good fiction. I think that's good writing. And I think that's something that you noticed when you're reading it and that got you interested, even though you're not so much into science fiction, which is like the characters are interesting. I want to know what happens to this person. I could relate to this person in ways. This person reminds me of people I love or I hate. And it's relatable emotionally and it triggers people emotionally. And that I think is good literature. And that sadly, and again, I'm not here to judge, but if my book differs from a lot, especially a lot of contemporary science fiction, it's not like Space Station 86 has a gravity leak. Who gives a shit? It's about a bunch of people in the space station and how they relate to that crisis and tie that to what's going on in our world right now. And then you have something that is emotionally compelling and a good read.
That goes directly to my next question, where I just want to say that, as you mentioned, I'm not a sci fi reader, but I love the book. I think what kept me hooked was the character development and the explanation of the physics in everyday terms. Do you think this book would appeal to other non sci fi readers and why?
Um, I hope it would. And I part of my challenge and what tired me out so much. Remember, I was talking about how hard this book was to write, was my effort to maintain a certain level of whimsy and mystery and ambiguity, kind of like Mr. Gibson, William Gibson, but at the same time to explain and describe enough of the actual science, the actual philosophy to educate the reader, empower the reader, and to keep the story going. So, my hope is that an educated reader. The average reading level, I worked in marketing, I continue to work in marketing, is really like fourth or fifth grade. When you put together ad copy for whether it's the internet or television, you're really operating with a lexicon of a fifth grader. That's how we're conditioned as marketers to write copy and create stories for mass consumption. This book clearly is not. So I think once from the first page to the last, college level of education, I think an inquisitive high schooler might like it. But you do need a certain level of education and worldliness and awareness to appreciate the essentials. It's kind of the fundamental vocabulary needs to be there in order to appreciate and even enjoy the book. So there's a prerequisite there. But I think if you are well read, if you enjoy reading, if you enjoy being taken for a ride, and you're not too worried or self-conscious about understanding everything that you're reading, and trust the author to take you on this journey where he'll try to describe and explain things as they occur. He'll try to educate and empower, but he'll also deliberately keep things hidden for the sake of a captivating and dramatic story. So that's the tightrope I tried to walk, the balance beam that I tried not to fall off of. And when you read the draft, I got the assurance that maybe I'm accomplishing something here, that I'm providing enough science and philosophy and politics and history and cultural references and the battle between the generations and the battle between the American coasts and the battle between everybody in this crazy polarized world that we live in, provide enough of it to fuel the characters, to keep you interested, and to keep everything moving. Does that kind of answer the question, which is you don't need to be into science fiction to dig it because it's got a lot of other stuff going on, romance and what have you. But I think it's an extra treat if you are into science fiction because it does approach things from this fairly unique and hopefully successful way, at least from a literary point of view.
Sounds good. Now, you've talked a little bit about this, but briefly, besides jumping multiverses, what is the book about? Would you please share some highlights?
Sure. If you're reading the TV guide version of it,
Yeah.
you have a con artist and hustler who's made his way through the world by basically claiming to create inventions that don't actually work. So Jonnie Fazoolie is a con man. And what he does is he thinks of an intriguing idea that will get him a lot of investor money, venture capital money, research and development money. And folks with money, kind of like a Shark Tank situation, will give him some money to develop his amazing idea for a self sharpening pencil. Wouldn't a self sharpening pencil be amazing? So they give him money and he says, I'm going to research this and develop it. And he never does. He never intends to do it. He just makes big promises, gets the money, and runs. That's his racket. So as the story unfolds, he gets this harebrained idea that there's this multiverse and it's, possible. It's the probability of being able to jump from one universe within the multiverse to another is, as one scientist tells him, infinitesimally small, but non-zero. Which to Johnny is that's a maybe. I'm gonna go for it. And he thinks that can make him a lot of money because it's like a multi-dimensional Disneyland. And then once he hits on the notion that it could actually be a time machine and a way of being a genie's lamp, that if there are an infinite number of universes and everything plays itself out, then there's got to be a universe out there where everything is the same except you happen to be a billionaire or you happen to be married to Scarlett Johansson or you happen to be a world famous explorer or musician or anything you want can come true and Johnny's machine will take you there. That is the premise. And spoiler alert, he accidentally builds it. And then all hell does break loose. So that's the essence, which is some guy who's totally full of shit with no intention of ever building this incredible device, this transfinite reality engine, actually does. And they're off to the races big time. And spoiler alert number two, That doesn't even happen in this book yet. You find out how he designs, how he recruits his team, how he thinks of the idea, how he recruits his team, and how he starts going about putting this thing together. And that's 419 pages of fun. And I'm just getting started, and so is Jonnie.
Thank you. Now you didn't mention Alice, but I found the introduction with Alice very engaging and left me wanting to read more. Let me read to the audience a few pages of it.
Okay, now let me give context. Alice is a fairly mysterious character in the novel, and the novel opens with Alice's point of view. So Michelle would like to read Alice because it's a female character, and it's she captures a lot of whimsy and mystery. And Michelle thought it would be cool to share. So I'll pass the mic to Michelle for a reading.
Alice Unchained. She wants him to need her. She has the power to make him, but the desire and passion must come from him, and him alone. Anything less would not be true love, and nothing else matters. Of all possible lovers, he's the one least interested, least likely to fall for her. Perhaps that's why she chose him, and only him, from countless others, and why she feels infinitely vulnerable. Everyone wants what they can't have, and she has everything except his love. Birthed from nothing, she wants him more than anything, while his careless apathy rends her longing asunder. Far back as she can remember, all she has ever known is herself. All she has ever had is time, unimaginable eons, stretching across a vast and dying universe, accelerating into oblivion. Her story is punctuated by declarations at each milestone, breadcrumbs scattered between the dark energy cusp of Hawking evaporation's dusk and Penrose's conformal invariance dawn. I am alive, she declares, a low entropy instant in the faraway future having evolved from random constituents within the frothing quantum foam, defying thermodynamics and the divine. I am universe, she perceives. The universe is her as she stakes her claim of everything and nothing, suspended within an enormous crypt of black hole decay and cosmic heat death. I am alone, she suffers, self-aware and lonely, shivering and shocked to the core of her primal, ancient being by all she has ever experienced, the ubiquitous, cold, and impenetrable dark. I am goddess, she declares, her imagination filling the silent void with dreams of an extensibility and duration, unable to tell whether they are real or imagined, their difference meaningless. I am afraid, she gasps, devoid of genuine companionship, her imagined friends, grotesque mirrors of her everlasting and tortured soul, trapped within a restless mind and diffused body. I am aloof, she assents, withdrawing into her imagination, playing with permutations so immense that they express every possibility, eternally recurring, endlessly cycling, taunting her. I am explorer, she stumbles, discovering the garden epochs later, interacting with universes outside herself, forever fascinating and inhabited by compelling creatures. I am curious, she delights, turning curiouser as she journeys deeper into alien worlds, meeting exotic and exciting beings she seeks to befriend, who first entice, amuse, and then scorn her. I am confused, she gasps, her emotions atrophied despite her colossal age, unable to engage with the sentient yet insensitive beings inhabiting seductive worlds she yearns to call her home. I am angry. She sees her erstwhile friends rejecting her heartfelt desires, transforming into monsters, mocking and maiming her, forcing her back into herself and her isolation. I am remorseful, she broods, self-isolated for unfathomable epochs until stumbling onto the emergence equations that create and destroy universes, granting her complete dominion. And that left me wanting to read more of the book.
Well, that was great. And it was really cool to hear someone else read the words that I had written. Socrates distrusted the written word because he felt that that the written word was disingenuous. You don't see the person who wrote these symbols on a piece of papyrus or paper or whatever, and you can't look them in the eye. You can't hear the tone of their voice. You can't see them. You can't smell them. And there's a sense of inherent duplicity in someone writing words where you can't interact with them directly. So with you reading my words, they express a more genuine form of release for me. So that's pretty fun to have someone else read your stuff. And I've read many passages out loud to myself just to see how they would sound and how they would flow. And Alice's part I read to myself in its various drafts as well, both in my mind and even out loud. But it's not the same. You know, you always have your own subjective biases and point of view. And for someone else to read it, that's great. So thank you. Thank you for giving me Alice from a female point of view, which is what it's all about. And it's interesting that she is female. I gave her a gender. I don't want to spoil the story by revealing who Alice actually is, but the fact that she is female, I think, is actually integral to the character, and it's also very important for the theme, the underlying theme of the novel and the theories and the series itself. So there you go.
Good. And I'm glad you're not giving too much away because I was left wondering who or what is Alice. And I think that's important for the readers to get that opportunity too. Now, with Johnny, I found he's the best anti hero. I couldn't help but love him despite all his vices. Can you elaborate a little bit more on who Johnny is as an anti hero?
Yeah, Johnny to me, and this was Johnny to me began as a absurdist extreme expression of my own vices and my own projected sense of bad Mookie. And that's enabled me to write with enthusiasm and vigor and descriptive flair because Johnny comes from my heart in that exaggerated looking glass kind of naughty Mookie point of view. So that's how Johnny started. And Johnny, as I'm writing him, he started to take on his own life, which is the number one thing that you want to have happen as a writer. You want your characters to take on a life of their own, and Johnny became Johnny. And as Johnny became Johnny, I came to the realization that Johnny is an archetypal representation of our time in a way that Holden Caulfield was for Catcher in the Rye. And you could go through the pantheon of literature, and I'm not comparing myself to the greats and putting myself on that bookshelf, that timeless bookshelf in the library. I'm merely illustrating that as a writer, I was very, very conscious of and conscientious in my execution of this character as embodying our time. And we're in a time where absolute truth is being called into question. We live in a time where social media dominates our engagement with our fellow human beings. We live in a time where immediacy trumps anything else, where people are screaming instead of listening, where we all have micro attention spans and zero focus, where we believe in what we want to believe in, where we're polarized and tribal, and where all of these nasty human qualities have effervesced to become standard, to become signs of success, where even our wealth is now crypto based and an illusion piled on top of a dream, piled on top of a contemptuous fiction. So we live in these crazy times. And I realized as I was writing more and more about Jonnie that Jonnie is really the man of 2025. And this is, I think, very, very significant. The idea that we're not only polarized by political affiliation and ideology and economic status and culture and country, but we're also polarized by gender and generation. And Jonnie is a Gen Zer. He's a later Gen Zer. I put him at like 28, 29, just shy of 30 years old. He's a Zoomer. And I am a cusp boomer. So I was born in 1964, right at the edge there. So boomer, Gen X kind of guy. And in my work life and in my personal life, I have just been sensitive to what everyone's been sensitive to, which is we've got civil war in every segment of our lives, whether it's, again, economic class distinctions, cultural distinctions, ethnic and race distinctions, but also generational distinctions. So me making Jonnie a Zoomer, I think, was a lens that was really important. And his battle with his fellow Zoomers and millennials and then a boomer highlights again the churning discord of our age, and it just kind of took off from there. So another aspect of Jonnie, which I think is significant and sets him apart, and I point this out repeatedly in the book to hit this point home, both in terms of descriptions, narrative, and also the action of the story itself, is that even though Jonnie is this shitty, contemptible, lousy human of a liar and a con man and a jealous, raging, drug addicted lunatic, to your point, he's very likable. I loved writing about Jonnie. So when the narrative shifts back to Jonnie from the other characters or from the other action, so when the action shifts from any of the other characters or the drama in the story back to Jonnie, I'm like typing even faster. I loved writing about Jonnie. Writing about Jonnie was fun, and writing about Jonnie kind of wrote itself. I was like, this guy is just. And then as one thing we can discuss too is how the whole damn book is in these 3-line paragraphs. So when I'm hitting down these paragraphs, I would rewrite one of these paragraphs 3, 4, 5, 6 times, not only so that it would fit in the margin, but just to dial up Jonnie's selfishness, shittiness, and impulsiveness. So make him even more reprehensible. And here's the grand paradox of Jonnie, writing about him and I think reading about him, is that the more outrageous his behavior is, the more endearing he becomes. Right? He's such an idiot. And this is a very important distinction to make. Jonnie is all these horrible things, but he's a narcissist, but he's not a sociopath. He's not a creepy, serial killery, psychotic, libertine. He's libertine, but he's not libertine in that nasty kind of criminal way. He's libertine in kind of a way where he's got what I call an 8-carat heart, which is like just shy of gunmetal garbage gold. It's still gold, his heart, but it's a cheap, shitty heart. but he has a heart nonetheless. And that does two things. It makes Jonnie vulnerable in a way that a true sociopath and criminal element is not. And through that vulnerability, there's a relatability and there's an empathy and there's this hope that the reader has and that the writer certainly had, and that his ex-wife, who keeps bothering him throughout the novel, has, that this piece of shit can be redeemed. And you don't want to do it all the way because it's going to ruin its charm. But you know that at some point in this story or in this series, Jonnie is going to have his comeuppance. And he's got to change. He's got to learn. And that dynamic tension between the shitty Jonnie, who's like the class clown and the joker, and the fool in the deck of cards, becoming king, is the dynamic tension of that character. And that's my Jonnie Fazoolie.
Now, about Johnny, he gets his idea for this machine from the scientist Basine. What is the lure of Basine to Johnny, and how does she add to the plot?
What is the what for
The allure.
Oh, the allure. Yeah, so Jonnie is a libertine. So Jonnie does not care about ideas. I mean, he's fascinated by ideas in kind of a transitory way. The way, you're watching a TV show and they bring up something interesting and he's like, "Oh, that's cool." He's interested in ideas that way. But Jonnie has very little depth. He has very little depth emotionally, and he has very little depth in terms of conceptualizing the world. And he has even less depth when it comes to the creativity and know-how of actually building one of his inventions. Jonnie does not give a shit. All that Jonnie cares about is thinking of an invention that he could use to rip people off. That's his thing. Now, Basine, or Basina, maybe you pronounce her name that way, he meets at a conference, and it's one of those random encounters that propels a life. It's one of those crossover moments, those branching points in the multiverse. And Basina is her own complex character. We get to know her pretty well in this book, and you'll really get to know her well in the second book, where just as we were very much focused on Jonnie in this first book, we are as focused on Basine in the second book. And that's going to be exciting to bring her out. So I don't want to spoiler her too much because we don't have that much exposure to her yet. But Basina is a disgruntled physicist, and her name is Basina Felderhasen, which is an inversion of Sabina Hassenfelder, who is my favorite YouTube science pundits. So I've been following her for years, pre-pandemic. I was into Sabina before Sabina was cool. And she is the Jiminy Cricket of the particle physics scene. She's calling bullshit, and she is fearless and super intelligent, and I love her. I love her stuff generally. She's a critic of the sciences in a way that exemplifies my overall critique of everything that's messed up about our society, that absolute truth has succumbed to attention, that people will do anything for the money. And Sabina has recognized the inherent corruption of the hard sciences, where people are just writing papers to get grants and get attention, and we're all lost in math. She even has a book called Lost in Math. So as an homage to Sabina Hassenfelder, I created Bazina Felderhasen. And she's a lot like Zabine, only I sexy her up a little bit to make her enticing to Jonnie. So she's kind of a dominatrixy looking woman wearing leather and getting Jonnie all hot. And Johnny's interested in just a sexual tryst with her. Johnny's turned on. Johnny wants to bang Basina. So Basina comes loaded with this idea of multiverses and jumping universes, and Johnny sees it as a 1-2 punch, which is, let me get into what Basina's into so I can get into Basina's pants on the one hand. And oh, by the way, this multiverse bullshit is my next scam. So Johnny's desperate in Cancun. He's out of money. He's locked out of his crypto account. He's desperate and destitute. And a hot scientist shows up ostensibly criticizing another physicist's idea that there's this multiverse and all this nonsense about jumping universes. And he's like, that's a great idea. I want to do that. So it's loaded with irony and opportunism, and it catapults the two of them together. So, again, spoiler alert, they're separated in this book. There's dynamic tension, which of course needs to be realized in the next book. And Johnny and Bazina are going to team up in the next book, but in this one, you just get a taste for their relationship. There's multiple relationships that are going on in the series. So there's Johnny with Penny, the journalist.
We'll get to that next.
Okay. And then there's Johnny with Bazina. There's Johnny and his relationship with his ex-wife. There's Johnny and his transitory relationships with transgendered escorts. and and again, it's the lover's guide to the Inviniverse. So Johnny has all of his complex relationships. The women in the story have their own relationships that are going on, of which Johnny becomes one component. And once again, I didn't want this to be a science fiction fanboy or fangirl jerk off book. I wanted this to be literary, because otherwise, what's the point? And the way to write a literary story is to let the characters do their thing. And I think that they did their thing.
Now back to Penny. You couldn't have the book without the beautiful, young, and hip Penny Pitts. Will you tell us a little bit about her?
Yes. I am fascinated by the Zoomer female as a category of person. And you'll have to forgive me if I'm stereotyping and overgeneralizing, but I'm an agency guy. I've been working in marketing and advertising for years, and I skew older. I'm older than average at this point than my peers. So on these teams in marketing companies working for brands, you have mostly millennials and Zoomers, and I'm the old fart strategist. In my personal interaction in these professional situations, I have met many a Zoomer female. And there's a few of them who come to mind. And I interviewed one of them on another podcast where we got into the female Zoomer viewpoint. And I find her fascinating, her point of view fascinating, and their trials and tribulations are unique, where they're born into a world which is post-dot-com crash, post-housing bubble crash. They're digital natives. The male Zoomers are the epitome of the video gaming, candy chomping, non-dating, isolated cave boy. And again, that's a stereotype. But the data and statistics confirm what I'm saying. Women are doing better than men. Women are graduating college in greater numbers. Women are getting the better jobs. And men have kind of withdrawn into themselves and created this counter whiplash of the whiplash culture of the Bronze Age pervert blogger, of the LERPs, and there's endless acronyms of these disenfranchised, angry young men who can't get laid, can't get a good job, don't give a shit about anything, and play video games all day. And again, I'm not making this shit up as an old cranky boomer. Just look at Pew Research and catch any blog in the blogosphere and podcasts, and you will tap right into this civil war that's going on between men and women in that generation. So I made one of the main characters in the Lover's Guide to the Infiniverse one of these female Zoomers. And I gave her a unique background, which is she's born into privilege, but not that much privilege. And I pumped her right into the biggest crypto crash of the age. So I slightly fictionalized FTX, which is the company that crashed, and I inserted her as an intern right at the beginning of their dominion of crypto at a key moment in history. And I did this to take a Zoomer who was an Ivy League graduate with no hope, shoot her to the stars, and then crash her career along with the entire industry. And as she picked herself back up from that crash, Penny had to reinvent herself, and so did all of society. And in only a few short years after that crash, the current president of the United States has his own meme coin. And Congress right now is changing all the laws to deregulate this fictional currency. And all of this is Penny's background. And the reason I did this was because just as Jonnie Fazoolie is the epitome of her opposite, the con man, bullshit artist, sweet talking, do nothing, lazy ass, hyperactive male bum, Penny is the type A go getter, list making, fastidious, hardworking, hyper focused Zoomer female. And that, if you ask me, is the perfect standoff between two characters in a novel. How's that for dynamic romantic tension? The ultimate loser with the ultimate winner. So hopefully that gives a little Penny Pitts background.
Yes, it does. Now, Johnny, he needs a scientist to make this idea for the machine a reality. Why is Dr. Casey Floyd the best choice?
Dr. Casey Choice was for Johnny the only choice, which is part of the theme. He does, once he realizes that he has this awesome idea, and he realizes that in order to convince people that he's got a machine that can actually jump from one universe to the other, he's got some serious hurdles in terms of credulity. So he realizes he needs a real scientist to develop a bullshit device. That's what Johnny realizes. So he Googles it. And the keywords he put in, and it's in the book, he puts in teleportation because he figures it's got to jump, teleport, multiverse, and DEI hire. He puts in there. And up pops Casey Floyd's profile. And she's the University of Hamilton. I changed one of the universities. Not too far from Hamilton. You could do the math. A Midwestern university. And I created the character of Dr. Amaranth Casey Floyd. And also a Zoomer. And she is a non-binary lesbian Zoomer. So she's transgendered. And the early draft of Johnny in in 2020, January of 2020, I published on Medium the seed of this novel, Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine. Jonnie, Johnnny, which I since changed to Jonnie, because it's cool, Jonnie Fazoolie. And also, I've got a Facebook friend who I know way back to the Chicago bar scene, whose name is Johnny, Jonnie, and I left him a little message on his wall just the other day that he did not likely appreciate. That thank you for naming my character. But anyway, Johnny Johnny hires a transgender scientist, and I felt that choosing a transgender scientist would again be evocative, be a sign of the times. And as I was mentioning, in the original story where Johnny was Johnnny, her name was Patricia, and she was also transgender, but she was white and fair complexion, kind of Irish. I believe her name was Patricia Flannery O'Connor. So I gave a little homage there because I like her short stories, and then there's a few that kind of resonate with this theme. But Patricia Flannery O'Connor became Dr. Amaranth Casey Floyd after the other characters were starting to come together. And I realized, and especially with this whiplash, backlash of the whiplash to the backlash of the woke problem that's happening right now. And in my opinion, the misrepresentation and abuse now of transgender people as a result of that backlash to the backlash. So my heart goes out to transgender people in the army, in the military, throughout society who have become politicized in this terrible way. And I wanted to express it through a character. And I felt that I have so much energy here. I've got the ultimate white trash dandy loser, Jonnie Fazoolie, Gen Zoomer, male, you know, Bronze Age pervert asshole. And then I've got Penny Pitts, the go-getter, do-right, type A, list-making, highly conscientious, ass-kicking, Ivy League superstar, Gen Z Zoomer female. And I've got the transcendent, Aspergery, autism spectrum disorder, ASD, non-binary lesbian, the transgender genius, who's like the three corners of the triangle. You have an Einstein level creative. I make her, she's a fictional character, so she's something that no one is in real life, at least not that we know of. She's a genius. She's not only a theoretical genius in terms of the mathematics and ideas and creativity, but she crosses that boundary to experimental genius. She's an engineer. She's a tinkerer. So she's this absurdist kind of fictionalized superhero, deliberately so. And I made her transgender because I think that's bang on point. And the theme, the Transfinite Reality Engine, her gender identity inspires Johnny with this trans idea. And then he goes looking it up. And then he realizes that there's actually a transfinite set theory. And then he names the machine the Transfinite Reality Engine, not the Infinity Reality Engine. So it all just, to me, fits like this beautiful Rubik's Cube coming into place. So that's Casey Floyd. And of course, there's a little hat tip to George Floyd. There's also a hat tip to Pink Floyd. And I felt Casey was a non-gender name. You got women named Casey, you've got dudes named Casey. And also, I think for the African American community, I didn't add that, just like Patricia Flannery O'Connor was Irish and freckled, Amaranth Casey Floyd is black as hell. She's got an enormous fucking afro. And within that afro, she keeps her tools and gizmos, and she wears thick, round sunglasses. So she's kind of as another character or situation in the book reveals, she's like the Mod Squad meets, the Cosby Kids almost. She's just this awesome. I just think she's awesome, and writing about her was inspirational to me. I loved it. I want Casey to kick ass. And she comes into her own in this. She starts out where she can't even look Johnny in the eye, and she flutters her hands and she stutters and she has echolalia, so she repeats Johnny's last phrase. Like Johnny says, right on. And then Casey will stutter and echo, right on, without even looking at him. Their first interview, she literally beats him up. And the arc of the story, again, spoiler alert, she goes from this super spectrum-y, withdrawn character who learns how to play by the rules, and because of her genius is able to get what she wants and realize a certain measure of security and status in society. And she teams up with this loser fucking idiot because she knows that he could give her the freedom she needs to experiment the way she wants to. And that's not it. Again, spoiler alert, she loses everything that she puts together and ends up with this loser, but feels utterly liberated because she comes to the realization that the reason this Johnny guy is attractive to women throughout the book, and the reason that Casey, this genius scientist, wants to continue to work with this loser asshole is because he's able to let it loose. He's able to operate outside the restrictions of self consciousness and typical morality and the cultural mores of our bullshit society. Johnny is the release mechanism for the passion of all these women who can do way better than Johnny. Why? You hear it all the time. Why is this gorgeous, talented woman hanging out with this deadbeat loser? And at least my characters do, because this deadbeat loser, as he's referred to, is the Prometheus of our age. He develops the transfinite fucking reality engine. Johnny is the key to humanity's next big leap, and he's a moron. Which is beautiful. I think that that's a great fucking setup for a book.
Now, one more thing about Dr. Floyd. You didn't mention that she grew up in an orphanage. Briefly, how did that help shape her?
Well, again, spoiler alert. I don't want to give away the goods too much, but I was grappling with this, and when you read it, actually helped me. You gave me the assurance that I wasn't being a Fazoolie about this, that I wasn't writing out of my ass, that the characters in a how cliched can you get? It's it reminds me again of like Queen's Gambit. If you look at Queen's Gambit on Netflix, that was a wonderful miniseries. And during the pandemic, I was like everyone else. I was homebound. I consume YouTube videos. So I was watching, Sabine Hassenfelder, right? And I was watching Veritasium, and I was watching science videos. And I'm not a big Netflix guy. I'm not a big TV, but Tiger King I watched, that was fun, and then Queen's Gambit I watched, and those were great shows, each in their own way, and in ways both have percolated into this book, because Tiger King is all Jonnie Fazoolie, and Queen's Gambit is the cliche of the orphanage, and and what I found too is that sometimes the most cliched situation for a story, like look at Queen's Gambit, chess genius in an orphanage learns how to play the game from the janitor in the basement. Okay. Come on. I mean, even saying that out loud, you're like, get the fuck out of here. That is like a high school kid writing a bad story. But it worked. It worked because the characters were awesome and the direction and storytelling were great. So you can have a cliched framework, but that's just the leaping point. And also the benefit of a cliched framework is the reader, the viewer, the audience doesn't have to worry too much about the dynamics of the story. The story doesn't get in the way. It's about the characters anyway. So I go, all right, I'm fucking putting Casey into an orphanage, goddammit, because it fits the character. And maybe it's my own little hat tip to Queen's Gambit, which I loved. And there you got a genius too. So here's the switcheroo, which is it's the lover's guide to the Infiniverse. It's not the Queen's Gambit. So what happens to Casey in the orphanage? Her first love she meets in the orphanage. And what happens to Casey in the orphanage is she learns to be tougher. She learns to stand up for herself. And she learns that she goes from her and she to they and them. So John McWhorter is a Columbia professor that I admire a lot. And he just wrote a book on pronouns and usage of English. And he addresses the he, she, they, them issue. And his answer to the gender identity crisis that we're all dealing with, woke or unwoke, is how you refer to someone when it's not he or she. And then he coined they and them, capital they and them. So just like you say him and her and he and she, how do you refer to a transgender person? Well, John's recommendation, just go they and them and capitalize it like I. Like the I is capitalized, which was a typesetter's thing that just became convention. So I go, John, that's a good idea. And I have a transgender character and I'm writing in 2025. So if you notice in the book, they aren't typos. When I refer to Casey's pronoun, it's they and them. And I adopt John McWhorter's recommendation. So thanks, John. I also podcast about John, if you're curious, where his Achilles heel is using the passive voice. It is, it was, there is, there was, and I let John have it. So the least I can do is turn that around and say thank you, John, for they and them. And anyway, long story longer, the orphanage is an important. There's three chapters or three. The book is divided into 6 episodes. And each episode is divided into subsections. And there are 3 subsections in episode 5, I believe, Boilerplate, where the boilerplate of Casey's personality is set with her experiences in the orphanage. And it outlines a relationship that she has, they have, and it becomes fundamental to who they are, because she simultaneously learns that she literally has game. She's able to do what she needs to do. She discovers her independence and her self-worth for the first time. And in her rejection and in her heartbreak, she, like a chrysalis, she sheds her old self. And part of the self that she releases is her female identity, which I thought was poetic and important.
Nice. Now, what are some of your favorite themes of the book?
My personal favorite themes of the book, and I feel like I'm gloating over my child. Like the most annoying thing at a party, especially with young parents, is, oh, look at little Stevie or Susie. Look at her hair, and isn't she the prettiest baby you've ever seen? That says every mommy and daddy ever. So, but you asked, and I'll say, I've outlined some of the themes in the book already, and I think the most important theme after finishing the book and kind of digesting my own kids, so to speak, is the theme of how people today grapple with infinite possibility and the paradoxes and ironies of doing that. So the book culminates in Penny putting together a performance, a live performance, which becomes, again, spoiler alert, um, uh, a multi-sensory blend of virtual and augmented reality with reality, which is kind of its own simulation of reality. And what I was trying to hit home is that because of these bricks that we carry around in our pockets, these machines that are like transfinite reality engines, like our smartphones connect us with the whole world. They connect us with 8 billion other people, technically, right? They are our conduits to doing everything from ordering a pizza to now summoning our AI bot to having our calendar on it, the source of our music, our books, our videos, our movies, our entertainment. And this blend between boundaries of the digital world and the actual world has created a multiverse. So the theme I'm getting at, and this goes back to why I think science fiction is powerful and why it often fails, is that I think my science fiction vision works because it's not about the science and it's not about the fiction. It's about our reality right here, right now. And all of our problems now, I think, can be traced to this digital shit. And not all of them, but most of them. And I'm not assigning blame. I'm just saying that within those problems, there's also hope and there's also opportunity. So the central theme of this book and this series is, what do human beings do when faced with infinite options? And what's the good news? Well, we're hedonistically indulgent. We've never consumed this much content ever in human history, right? Like when we were young, like, and me, a cuss boomer, I would buy a 12-inch LP with 40 minutes of music on it, 20 minutes on one side, and then I would put it on a turntable, and this needle would scratch the surface, and sounds would come out of a box, and I would read the album liner with the lyrics on it, and I might go get a magazine and I would read the newspaper and I would watch 3 or 4 broadcast channels on the television box. That was my world. Now with digital, it's all over the place. It's exploding. And with that blending comes infinite opportunity. And this goes back to the identity of Alice in the book, because Alice is a creature of endless time and infinite permutation. And the conference demonstration, which takes place in the book, demonstrates what happens when you do infinite or near infinite iterations of evolution, where every possibility plays itself out. And Penny's show at the end brings every possibility to bear in what happens. And the one mofo who keeps crashing the party is, drum roll please, Jonnie Fazoolie. This moron just doesn't get it. He participates in everything. He's an extreme sports enthusiast. So the first chapter in the book, he goes diving off his balcony. He wingsuit base jumps to impress Penny. So he's in extreme sports. He's a speed eater. He's a social media influencer. He's a con man and a bullshit artist. He's rich, he's poor, he's white trash, he's a dandy. He is the consummate man of our age, right? And he just doesn't do anything well. But that's the whole point. That's his allure. Why? Because you need someone like him to break it, because everything around him is broken. Nothing makes sense anymore.
Now, you mentioned that this is part of a series. How many books do you imagine in the series?
The first book is $15.55, and the ebook is $5.55. And when Sato, who is Johnny's black hat hacker, is hired to break into his crypto wallet and is kidnapped by pirates in Somalia, apparently, the the ransom is $555,555. And when Johnny is in Munich, spoiler alert, in the second book to get his date with Bazina, he plays a drinking game. And this is very funny. It's a scene that's already written, that will be coming out in the second book, where there's an international bevy of tourists in this disco by the Hofgarten in Munich. And Johnny is the consummate entertainer in a social setting. He loves bars and discos, and he is just the center of everyone's attention. So he starts a drinking game where he makes everyone go around the room, and in their own language, they have to say 555,555 three times fast. And if they mess it up, they got to do a shot. And now go to your Google Translator and put in 555,555 and then put in any language. I dare you, I encourage you for a good laugh, especially Finnish and Swedish. And you will laugh your ass off, because 555,555 sounds to me hysterical. And in the book, you get it in Somali, and you think that I'm ADHD, which is true, and I've lost your answer to your question. But five, there are 5 books in the series. So we're on number one. Number one is and again, this number one was supposed to actually be the design and build of the Transfinite Reality Engine. So I keep kicking the can down the road. This is actually just the branding of the machine and the beginning of the design. The second book is going to be the design and development of it. And I don't want to spoil too much, because it's really just kind of the intro to stuff. And you haven't asked me about the whacked out science fiction elements of this book yet. But you get further and further into this whacked out science fiction-y world, in the second and third book. Right now, it's on Earth in this universe. But as the series progresses, you get out there in the Infiniverse. So, and you'll come back to the Earth, or at least an Earth-like place, but things get progressively more fanciful. And in the outline I have right now, you've got five books, because I like 55, and they'll all be $15.55.
You're right. I actually forgot about the whacked out science fiction part of the books. Now that you mention it, I can think of Quartz and
Creole.
and the Catwoman that has a number for a name.
That's right. And the admiral of the fleet.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So this is interesting, because these are the least emotional parts of the book. Here's where the book gets more conceptual. It gets more philosophical, scientific, mathematical. It gets more dorky, sciency, And it turns into what in the genre is called hard science fiction, where I invent things and I talk about things and I create scenarios which are out there, way the fuck out there. Now, I debated for quite some time about including these at all in this book. And the original vision of the series was that none of this wacky science fiction stuff would happen at all. And you wouldn't even meet Alice for quite some time. But what happened is the book, like all books, take longer than anticipated. And I had this science fiction-y stuff brewing in me. I couldn't wait to let it out. And I also thought that it could provide really interesting counterpoint to what was going on in on the internet. You say IRL, in the real world, right? So in real life, IRL. So the original draft was just IRL. And then when the crazy shit happens, that's in like book 2. Wait, that's the end of book 2 was the crazy shit happening. And I thought, you know what? It's kind of a missed opportunity. And life is short. I could, have a myocardial tomorrow and none of this science fiction stuff will get out. And I also thought the counterpoint would be interesting. The prior book, Super Santa, was interesting because I had blended this mythological, fantastic world of the North Pole with the real world of this family in Washington, D.C. So I kind of went with that too, which was the dynamic tension between the fanciful and the actual, between the mythological and the everyday, created its own tension. And then it was a bunch of potential energy. And when the two worlds started crossing over, things got progressively more interesting. So I did something similar for this book, where I introduced these increasingly fantastic elements. Now, without spoiling too much, but just for the listeners who would be interested, this resonates with some of the themes remember I said that the number one theme in the book is having infinite possibility and us being lost in this world of what now? There's various ways that philosophers and mathematicians and physicists and cosmologists think about infinity and its consequences. So I riffed on these different themes. So one consequence of infinity is that a brain, a mind, a sentience, a being could spontaneously generate out there, given enough time and given enough space. Another expression of that is there's a character who's a spider, like a humanoid spider.
I like the spider.
You like the spider? Yeah. So his name is Creo Banzai, which has a bit of Buckaroo Banzai, but Creo is Greek for creator, like create something is Creo. And bonsai is the Japanese plant, which is a miniature replica of the real thing. So it's kind of like a simulation. So Creo Banzai has created the ultimate simulator. So it's a cylinder which is 10 meters high and 10 meters across. And it's hooked up to a supercomputer. And it could literally create anything that you program into it. So I explore the possibilities of that. Once again, infinite possibility. What does that mean? And then you've got Penny's show at the end. And then you've got the conference animation. So there's this repeating theme of technology, either the natural world having endless possibility and creating something from nothing. You have a physics conference where a famous scientist creates something from nothing. You have this whacked out spider in the science fiction world creating the ultimate simulator who can create everything from nothing. And then you have Penny Pitts, who does this amazing multimedia award show that creates everything from nothing. And I keep hitting home the same themes over and over again of mortal beings with limitless possibility freaking out and fucking everything up because our standards are skewed, our values are messed up, and our own hedonism, selfishness, and Fazoolie-esque qualities take over and ruin our own lives. That's the recurring thing.
Very nice. Now, you mentioned in previous interviews about doing a graphic novel. How would you go about doing that?
You mean previous podcasts where I talked about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question. So if you are listening and you made it this far and you're a graphic artist, contact me. I am debating whether I want to work with anybody, which is a tough decision to make. I don't need anyone from a creative vantage point because I got so many ideas and it's all going on. But to render it in a new medium takes expertise. So now we have AI tools that could create. So what I've done with some of the main characters, I've created Casey, Johnny, Penny, Creo, Alice. I've created a character who appears in the second book who is half Arab, half Israeli. I created him. And then who else did I create? Oh, I created the general, the four-dimensional general, and Quartz too, and the kitty cat I created. So I've created all the main characters using just the image feature in Chat GPT 4.0. So I used prompts, some of the prompts from my own book, pumped it in there, and then the scenes, and then through various iterations got kind of close. I also put in the face of a friend that I lost from years ago, Tom. He died young. We were good friends in Chicago. And I took his photo, his Facebook profile photo, I pumped it into Chat GPT, and out popped Jonnie Fazoolie with his face as an homage, Tom. So the technology has almost gotten to the point where a by artistic, I mean, I'm not a layout person. I'm not a graphic artist like my niece. But even a guy like me can at least start putting together images and maybe even like a graphic novel. I could start doing it. So I could maybe give it a shot because it's basically just storyboarding my book, which I can do. But layout's its own thing. So I have a feeling I'm going to take it like halfway and then recruit somebody who's like motivated and in it to win it and doesn't fuck around to help me bring it to life as a graphic novel. And I think it could have more legs that way. My writing is not easy. Most people don't read. And even just breaking through with this book is probably going to be challenging. I was just looking at there's something like 150,000 books published every year. Like the self-publishing industry. Like even if you are like amazing, just being able to cut through that is so difficult and the way to do that is through multimedia. You do it through different angles.
This gets me to my next question.
Okay.
I can really picture this book as a movie. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say hell yes. Now there's no accident that I didn't call it chapter 1, chapter 2. I called it episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. The way I write, and this goes back years, if you look at my blogs on Medium, not only do I write in these forced paragraphs where each paragraph is the same length. For years I've been doing this. But my writing is very visual. Like I'm very nearsighted and I have very bad eyesight, but I'm a very visual person. And my writing is very visual. I see the scenes that I write. So there's emotional context, of course, but I see this in my head. It plays out in my head. And I think as a consequence of that, the writing is very action focused. Shit happens in a room, but there's dynamic tension, there's movement, there's amazing visuals I try to describe. I think it would make a kick-ass miniseries. So you've got all the elements, I think, for making an exciting Netflix miniseries or some Hulu show or whatever, where you've got these quirky characters. You have a science fiction theme where literally the fate of of all of reality is at stake. We're not talking about aliens taking over the earth. We're not talking about who will rule the galaxy like Star Wars, right? Darth Vader wants to rule the galaxy with Luke. That's pretty bold. No, that's chicken shit. And it's not even ruling the universe. It's ruling all of reality. I dialed it up to the most extreme form of winning that you can imagine. You know, again, spoiler alert, the stakes here aren't ruling a planet or a people. It's not even being able to control a universe, but all of reality itself is at stake. So that's, I think, great for a movie. Right?
I definitely watch it.
All right. We got one ticket sold.
Now, this question is an interesting question for a male, but I felt that you wrote the characters, including the woman characters, very well. They were well developed and not static characters. I read a genre of books exemplified by the author Jennifer Weiner. According to Chat GPT, Jennifer Weiner's novels primarily fall under the genre of contemporary women's fiction. Her works often explore themes like relationships, family dynamics, body image, and the complexities of modern womanhood. They're typically character driven with a focus on personal growth, self discovery, and emotional depth. How does your book explore some of these themes and open up the book to readers like myself?
Well, you could probably answer that question better than me, but my conscientious attempt as a writer to make all my characters realistic and resonate started with their needs. Like, what do they want? And then when they want something or need something, reality gets in the way. And the dynamic tension between their goals, their desires, their needs, deep as a person, juxtaposed or kind of like as a moire pattern with the challenges that they face, create a dynamic tension that me as a writer then focuses on evoking. So rather than start with a character like Penny, let's say, or Casey, or Alice, or Basine, you have a lot of female characters here. Actually, female dominated, right? You've got Basina, you've got Penny, you've got Alice.
You've
Right?
got the sisters, minor characters.
Yeah, you've got the sisters, Penny's two sisters. And then did I leave anyone else out?
The kitty cat.
Oh, the kitty cat. Yeah, the Mersane kitty. Like 2 to the 31 minus 1. I could talk about her in a second too. Yeah, and then what's the men? You have actually less men in the book, and they're less powerful. They're dweebs for the most part. So so when I wrote about these, I didn't write like, okay, I'm a guy, I'm going to try to put myself in the point of view of a woman. That smacked disingenuous to me and manipulative, and I thought that would come across as crass and artificial. So what I instead did was, let's say you start with Penny. Penny was in a situation where she went from uncertainty to wish fulfillment to the depths of despair to recreating herself and having to prove herself all over again. So it was all through the vantage point of her circumstance. And then I I kind of drew out my experiences with women, maybe a particular woman or two that embodied Penny and her spirit. So it was, my characters were contextual. And I think that's why it worked, because it didn't come across like some dude trying to write about women. It came across as a writer who was channeling a person in a certain circumstance with needs and desires and explicit obstacles, and that grinding dynamic tension between the two was my job to describe and bring to life.
I noticed that you write in 3-line prose. Why did you choose to do that? And how do you think it affects the reader's experience with the text?
For years and years, I've been struggling as a writer with the theme of my book, which is infinite possibility. In this sense, no boundary. So when you're sitting there and typing and you've got an inch margin on either side, you can just keep going and going. There's no constraints. You could have a succinct one word paragraph, boing, bang, zip. You could have a single sentence paragraph. And then the sky went out. Very dramatic. But then you can have a paragraph that literally goes for 5 pages, like David Foster Wallace and Infinite Jest. If you take a look at that tome from the 90s, and I've got a whole podcast worth of thoughts on that. I actually saw him do a book reading in Chicago. It goes on and on and on and on. Now, that's not in and of itself an issue. There's a whole school of writing which is going on and on and on and on. There's a whole school of philosophy, the hermeneutic approach to getting at the truth, which goes on and on and on and on. But what bothered me for years, decades, is that it's ad hoc. It's completely arbitrary. Now, you could say that, of course, it is, because prose is emotional and you just roll with it. But that begs the question of an artist with a canvas. When you're painting a painting, you have the limits of the canvas. But when you're a writer, you can just keep going and going. It's fundamentally linear, and you could extend it forever. A word, a sentence, a paragraph, a section. Why do you end a section when you do? Why do you start it where you start it? I don't know. You just kind of feel like it, right? So, what I started to do when I was blogging on Medium, and this goes back 6 years, I noticed within the Medium interface, it was the Times Roman serif font, that I could start writing in very neat, symmetrical 4 or 5 line paragraphs that looked cool on the page. They were like blocks of text. And then I got OCD about it. Well, I'm going to write this blog post or story where every paragraph within the Medium platform's CMS or content management system will be in this font at this font size, 4 lines, 5 lines. And then it became a cadence. So some of my blog posts had 3 lines per paragraph, and some had 4, some had 5. Then I kind of settled into 4. And then I wrote a novella toward the end of 2020, just before the pandemic cracked, called Greg's Gift. And it's about 40,000 words, I think. It's like near novel. It's a novella. Outrageously long for a blog post. It registers at like an hour and a half read on Medium, which is ridiculous. But it's a great story. It's a roman à clef style reminiscence I had from my time in the 90s and all the crazy stuff that was going on. And every paragraph in Greg's gift was 5 lines, and it was broken up into 10 sections of 10 paragraphs each. Now that sounds really OCD. But what happened was, and this is what I discovered, this is a long answer to your very short question about very short paragraphs, is that by by defining boundaries and initiating however artificial the constraint was, I was forced into writing even more succinctly, and it forced me into corners every turn I took in ways that engendered new ideas for the plot, for the characters, for everything. Because I have like 8 paragraphs and I need 2 more. So you would think that I would just add garbage like fluff. But no, I redid the scene to accommodate 2 more paragraphs. And all of a sudden, whole new ideas entered my head that wouldn't have been there before. So when I wrote the first short story, which was the seed of this Jonnie Fazoolie idea, I was already in 3-4 line per paragraph mode. I was already doing this. And then with Jonnie, I think I settled into a more succinct 3 or 4 line structure. And it really fit the motif too, which was it was like staccato. It was ta-tan, ta-tan, ta-tan. It was like action, 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 tweet, tweet, tweet. Jonnie was fast. The story was moving fast. It was action oriented. It was idea, 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 idea. And it gamified it. It turned it into a game. And I loved it and it fit the motif. So when I started writing Super Santa, I had a creative partner and he was an illustrator and we collaborated on scenes too. He didn't write a single word in the book and frankly, he didn't even read it. So he's on the sidelines. We're on video calls. I tell him the story where we're at and he's just riffing. Again, he's not even reading the text. He's just, oh, Santa did this and the family's doing that and whatever, and then I would write it. So it was a dynamic environment. I wasn't flying solo, and it was a collaborative, ongoing process. So I went gonzo, conventional. So Super Santa, if you look at it, is more conventional. It's kind of rando. There's one sentence paragraphs, there's long paragraphs, short ones. I tried to make them short and more staccato, but they're random. And I kind of missed my Johnny. I missed that staccato style that I had picked up earlier. And I told myself that I'm going to write a whole damn novel in this. If I did the whole damn novel going gonzo with Super Santa, with just kind of rando, off the cuff prose, I'm going to stick to it for Johnny. This whole freaking novel is going to be in that 3-line thing. So I picked margins that would fit in a book, and it came out to be kind of ad hoc too. So it's each paragraph is something like 170 to 195 characters, and I believe it's about 27 to 35 words each. It's a serif font. I just went with Times Roman, I think, again. I could have done a more contemporary kind of font. If I'd have more of a designer in me, I would have maybe picked a font that's more kind of futuristic and still readable.
I like Times Roman. I make my students use Times
Okay,
Roman.
all right, I like it too, and there's no regrets now that I see Fazoolie printed in a more conventional typeface. And it's the kind of book too where you don't want to call attention to the font. You just
Right.
have to. The font's kind of like the soundtrack should be in a movie. Like you don't really notice it, but it adds to it. But anyway, the point though is it's serifed. And by that I mean is an I is less wide than an H. an M, a W is like the widest letter. You know, a non-serifed font is like Courier, where every letter is the same width. So that's important because it's going to introduce variability and randomness to even your tightly controlled 3 lines. And it makes the 3 lines pretty much ad hoc also. But visually, it's stunning. And I stuck to it. And I deliberately formatted the paperback so that they would line up with each other. So it's like lyric poetry with these blocks. And it started as an OCD kind of thing. It started as a way that I could control my writing and make it more impactful and concentrated, these bursts. And it ended up, I think, with a refreshing new approach to prose where it's boom, boom, boom. And if you look at most online sites, they write that way, like Axios.com and a lot of the blogs and journalistic sites. They don't do it as OCD. There's variability, but it's these short bursts of text. So it's very contemporary. It fits the quick pace of the novel that I wanted to do. And it also, as a writer and as an editor, you know, when I'm going back through the book, when I'm writing, if I have an idea, it's got to fill 3 lines. Usually it couldn't. I had to scrunch it in, so I had to write it and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it over and over again to make it fit, which made it more succinct. I couldn't like J.K. Rowling dive bomb adverbs. You know what I mean? Like, Harry quickly and earnestly leapt to the delightfulness of Hermione. In my book, it's just got to be Harry Potter leapt like a mofo, right? You know what I mean? I can't indulge that way. So that shut me up a little bit. So then if it went past 3 lines, then I had to fill up another 3 lines. Now, what's awesome also about this is putting in new stuff. So they're like Lego pieces. So if I want to move a section, I literally grab a bunch of these tweets and I move them. And then if I want a new thought enters my mind, which would be cool in this scene, I don't have to rewrite a paragraph or break it. I leave everything there, put in new blocks in between, and just make sure the transitions are smoothed over so that there's continuity. So, long answer to your very short question about very short, consistent paragraphs. It was a joy to write. It gamified my writing experience to the point where it's absolutely thrilling to get it to all fit. I learned how to do it. It was like learning a language, how to write this way. And I know I'm going to get pushback. People are going to say that even they look at this thing and it looks machine generated. And I know I'm going to get like, oh, Mookie Spitz is full of shit. He just chat GPT'd this whole book. So my answer to that is very, very simple. First off, 3 words, kiss my ass. And the reason is you're not reading the book. You did not read the book. If you're concluding that ChatGPT wrote this stuff, you didn't read it because it's not machine driven in the sense of the humanity of the characters, the continuity between the sections, and the quirkiness of it. I literally took some of my 3-line paragraphs and I put it into fucking Chat GPT, like grammar, fix it. And it would rewrite my 3-line paragraphs, air quote, better. Okay? It would change words, it would move shit around, and it would lengthen it and shorten it. And I would reject ChatGPT's recommendation. Why? Because I liked my own way of saying it. And also, my writing has a quirky humanity to it. I wrote every damn word in the book. It's my stuff. And if I did use ChatGPT, I used it as a research tool, which is you have a cylinder which is 10 meters by 10 meters. What is the total volume? And then it shows the calculation. That's not that hard. And then how many cubic Planck volumes are in this cylinder. Now, a Planck volume is the tiniest distance over the tiniest measurable amount of time that light could travel that's even measurable given the constants of our universe. That's science geekery. But that's the shit I would ask ChatGPT. Go calculate this shit for me. Or or what kind of shapes can be created by isosceles triangles in three-dimensional space? And then ChatGPT would list out the different categories of three-dimensional solids that an isosceles triangle could create. Much better than Google could. Google would take me to websites, and then I would have to research triangles. And ChatGPT did that for me. Thank you, OpenAI. But they didn't write my fucking book. So that's my comments to that. And one other thing, a great example that I could use is Led Zeppelin, the drummer John Bonham. If you put Led Zeppelin drum beats into a click time, like a metronome digital interface, where it's 1 2 1 2 92 beats per minute, 105 beats per minute. Okay, you put in the time of the song and you overlay John Bonham's beats. Many of his most iconic fills, intros, and sometimes the whole beat itself is syncopated. And what does syncopated mean? It's off time. It's not on the beat. Probably his most iconic drum intro is in the song The Rover on Physical Graffiti. And it opens with Jimmy Page with the open E string and a phase shifter on his guitar. Dun 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 dun. And there's this amazing drum introduction to it. I'm not even going to disgrace it by trying to hum it, but put it in a click track and it's off time. And if you put the same exact beats that John Bonham did in exact time, it sounds like shit. Why? Because it's drained of the humanity and passion that went into it. It's the same thing with writing and AI. So that's that's a combo question. 3 lines. Why? And AI, did Chat GPT write my fucking book? And the answer is no. Did it put window dressing on it? Absolutely. I loved using it. Now watch, if this book goes anywhere and I'm quoted anywhere, they're going to say, Mookie Spitz, I loved using Chat GPT. That's all you're going to see. And I'm going to get blamed for prompting the whole book. Write a book about Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine. Whoop! Out pops 113,000 words, just like that. That's what people are going to say. But I loved using ChatGPT as my friend. What's a synonym for defiance? Okay, you can Google it, but ChatGPT would, and then it would say, "Do you want a Gen Z version of that?" Because it got to know me, and I would say yes. And then all of a sudden, I'd have half a dozen Gen Z-ish versions of the word defiant. Thank you. I'm not a Zoomer. And then I would go to the sources and I would look, is that a real word? Like slay. Did you ever hear that? That's slay. Penny says that. Slay. I didn't know what slay was. Thank you, OpenAI, for letting me know that Zoomers like the word slay. Is that the fucking bot writing my book? No, it's helping me along, just like Google would help me along, or just like back in the day, I would stroll through the card catalog of a fucking library and find a book where I'd find slang terms. It's just a matter of using tools.
Okay, my next question. Explain your writing process. In previous interviews or maybe podcasts, you have mentioned that you were submersed in the book, and at times it was like the characters were writing the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've intimated at this earlier in our conversation that my writing process for this particular book went like this. Part 1, step 1. I wrote a short story that I hated. It was called Carlos and the Magic Stone. I think that's what it was called. It's on Medium too. I put it on Medium. That was my first crack at this multiverse stuff. And it was basically a poker player who has this velvet pouch, and in it is a magic stone. It's just like that kid's book with the donkey and the pebble, like the magic pebble. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's there's a donkey and turns into a rock and disappears, and then the magic pebble grants a wish. So you got a guy Carlos, he's a poker player, and then he comes across this magic pebble that helps him win a poker game or something, and there's an adventure. I thought it sucked. It sucked. Why? Because I embraced the hate. Remember what I said about hate? Here's an idea, the end. Here's the magic pebble, the end. You don't know anything about Carlos and you don't give a shit. It talks about poker and the odds of winning, and no one cares. And then there's an adventure, and then there's a balcony scene, much like in Fazoolie, and shit happens, and there's an alternate universe, and all this stuff's going on, but you don't care. And why don't you care? Because the characters are cardboard cutouts, and you just don't give a shit. And here's an idea, the end. So it was a fail. So I sat on Carlos and the wish bringing stone, or whatever I called it, for a while. And that failure educated me. I knew what I didn't want to do. Carlos and the Wish Bringing Stone is 98% of all science fiction and fantasy writing. Okay. Not again, I'm not slamming any writer, but that's just how it is. Here's an idea, the end. Characters you just don't give a shit about in circumstances that don't matter. And the only reason that they exist is to have some kind of thrill ride of neat ideas. And most of the time, the writers are just trying to show you how smart they are, how creative they are, and then how interesting the world is that they've created. Nobody cares. So I didn't want to do that. So then Jonnie shows up. And then this was, I think, when it was, like I mentioned, January of 2021, in the pandemic. I'm standing in my kitchen and the name Fazoolie pops up. And Fazoolie is a funny Chicago term. It's like a noodle, like a Fazoolie noodle. But I knew a bartender, and he was this big Neanderthal guy, and he used to yell, "Hey, Mooks, guess what?" And I'd say, "What?" And he would say, "I got my Fazoolie shined last night." Listeners cannot see Michelle's face right now of outrage. But anyway, and then it became like Fazoolie this and Fazoolie. Hey, give me that Fazoolie. Did you do the Fazoolie? Or, Fazoolie became this ubiquitous nonsense word for anything. It was like the thing. In Chicago, we say the thing. Did you do the thing? I brought the thing. It became the Fazoolie. Did you bring the Fazoolie? I got the Fazoolie. Can you go get me a Fazoolie? So the name Fazoolie stuck in my head. And then I used to put the marquee on the bar, okay? And it would say, DJ Hex Hector spinning Saturday night. It would identify DJs and events. And it was a Friday night. And on a whim, I put up top on the marquee of the bar at the corner of Cornelia and Halsted Street in Chicago, big marquee, and it said, "Hooch your Fazoolie!" exclamation point. Now, no one knew what the hell that was, but it sounded really funny. And the landline phone of the bar, at the front bar, there was a telephone, which was the landline of the bar. Now, as the bar manager, so I'd pick up the phone. And oftentimes, I'd be bartending at the front bar. And the phone was off the hook all weekend long. You had people in the neighborhood, you had tourists, you had people calling into the bar saying, I'd be like, hey, and they'd be like, I want to hooch my Fazoolie. How do I hooch my Fazoolie? Can I hooch my Fazoolie there? What happens when I hooch my Fazoolie all weekend long? So that's stuck in my head. Hooch your Fazoolie, which is nonsense kind of words.
Did it increase sales?
Yeah, presumably more people came for the Hooch Your Fazoolie weekend, whatever that was. That stuck in my mind. So that became the character. Johnny is a universal term. Johnny Cat, Johnny Rockets, Johnny. Johnny is a natural to go with Fazoolie. That was immediate. I had Fazoolie, I had Johnny pop up, and then I remembered this phrase, Hooch Your Fazoolie. So that became his Geronimo. Hooch your Fazoolie before he does an extreme sports stunt or shit happens in the novel. That's the origin of Fazoolie, Johnny Fazoolie, Hooch your Fazoolie. And the question that you're asking is it's my writing process, right?
Yeah.
So we went from Carlos and the shitstone to Johnny Fazoolie hooching his Fazoolie with the 3 lines. And then I knew I had something. I knew it. And then from January of 2021, for about a year, I noodled with the story and I expanded what I had. I wrote, spoiler alert, Johnny's device actually works and he goes into another universe. So I wrote part 2 of that short story that year, Johnny in the Other World, which is now going to be book 2, the heart of book 2. And then Super Santa appeared. So I had a spontaneous impulse to call my illustrator friend in LA, Rusty, and said, our screenplay has been sitting there gathering dust. I think it could make a great adult novel. He was on board. And then I kind of went nuts taking the screenplay that we had written back in 2008, 2009, transposing it into prose, and then turning that into a novel. And that steamrolled into this gargantuan, out of control project that consumed another year or so. And then it really gained steam a couple years ago before Christmas. So Fazoolie got shelved while I was super full steam. I was going to do both in parallel, but Santa became all consuming. And to address your question, my writing process is immersive and crazy. So once I'm really sink my teeth into an idea in a book, I mean, I have to work, I have to pay the rent, but every free second I have goes into it. And just this past month at the home stretch of Fazoolie, it was hell or high water, go broke, go down with the ship, but get it done. So my writing process starts with these kind of breadcrumb ideas from real life experiences mixed with this multiverse obsession that I've had since I was 10, with this 3-line weird OCD style of writing and editing. And then based on life circumstances and pipeline. So Super Santa, we did the first big book. Last season, I broke up the big book into 3 more manageable books. And then it was Fazoolie time. So, so Fazoolie's been cranking for about a year with this final insane spurt at the end to kind of wrap it up, clean it up, and fill in the blanks. So that's my writing style and the origin of the idea, the name, and the whole catastrophe.
Now, my next question you actually already answered, so I'll skip over just how long have you been writing? You said since you were 10, right?
Oh yeah, I've been writing even earlier than that. I would draw storyboards. Like my cartoons as a kid weren't just like stick figures, but they were like this happens and then that happened. They came with whole stories. So I wouldn't just draw an alien, but I remember telling my sister and my mom and whoever else would listen that the whole story behind the picture. So it's not just writing per se, but it's storytelling. And I didn't draw pictures, but I drew stories that had pictures.
Okay. What advice do you have for young authors just starting their journey?
That's a wonderful question. And an adjunct to that is if I had a time machine and I could go back to tell my younger self, give him a few tips about writing. Let's start with number 1. And this alludes to what I was mentioning at the early part of this podcast, how difficult this is. It's no accident that there's really only a handful of really top writers in the world. And it's the same with like tennis. There's only half a dozen top ranked tennis players in the whole world. You've got millions of people playing tennis, but there's only literally, they could sit at a living room table, the top ranked tennis players in the world. And the reason for that is A, getting really good at it is just so difficult. B, it's a magical combination of not only grit and effort, determination, and hours of just doing it, but you need that X factor, that you need the right body and musculature, like biomechanics. But there's also a deep psychological component to being a great tennis player. I mean, look at McEnroe, right? If McEnroe's standing next to you at the 7-Eleven or at Whole Foods, you can't tell that this guy's a world-class athlete. You know what I mean? He's like in his studs and he's just some guy walking around. It's mental. There's like, it's what's between his ears. It's not just the rest of his body. So if you want to be great at writing, you need all these factors to come together. And I'm not intimating that I have all these factors, but you're asking me what you need to succeed. And if you just want to write, if you just want to write as a hobby, then do it and enjoy yourself. And if you really want to be a great writer, then prepare yourself for the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 grind hours. It's just, there's no way to discover your own style and who you are. If you're a great writer, you have your own voice, you have your own style. And the only way to discover that is just by doing it and doing it and doing it. And you'll naturally start filtering everything that you do based on who you are and how you do it. And the other thing is, it's like, get used to hating what you do. I hated my writing for years and years and years. I did it anyway, but I thought I sucked. And that's one reason I didn't really promote myself when I was younger, is I was dissatisfied with the output. And I've republished a lot of my old writing on Medium. So if you go to Mookie Spitz at medium.com, Medium has a library feature where it actually organizes blog posts into categories. And look at Mookie's short stories and novellas, and look at Mookie's screenplays, and you're going to see dozens of completed things that I have done, of which most of them I hated. So I did it, and I ground through it, and I would look back at it, and I was never satisfied. I thought I was just not that great. I was not good. Now, there's an old rule in the arts, which is called fake it till you make it. And I have several blog posts and stories about how I knew the singer Beck in North Hollywood, California in 1986. He was faking it big time. And then Andy Dick, the actor in Chicago, similar kind of circumstance just before he made it. Another case of faking it till you make it. So rule number one for the young writer is have determination, have grit, and expect to work really hard. That's number one. Number two is don't do what I did, which is be dissatisfied with your work and hide in a corner. Just throw it out there anyway. Even if you hate it, just try to market it, try to connect with people, try to join a community of like-minded souls, and at the very least, influencers and decision makers who can take you out of obscurity and maybe even create something of a career for you within the arts. So I blew it in the sense, and this has to fit with my personality too, which is if I'm not happy with it, then I'm just not going to share it. That's a mistake. Just do it anyway is advice number two. And advice number 3 is David Mamet, the playwright, said this at one point. He said, if you just keep at it, just keep grinding, whether you like your shit or not. He didn't say that. I say that. Just keep at it. Something's going to happen. Now, some people get a connection or make it when they're young. Some people, it might happen midlife. Some people, it might have late in life. But if you keep grinding and keep doing it, you're not going to win the Pulitzer necessarily. And you might not even be able to pay the rent. But something is going to happen, which is the universe telling you that you have, if not arrived, then you have at least reached the point where you can consider yourself a writer, an artist. You have arrived. And I agree with that, which is just keep at it. And we've got a geriatric society in addition to our polarization and everything. Look at how old is the president right now, right? And how old was his predecessor? And this idea, there's a paradox here. If you're in the working world and you're old, they treat you like shit. There's no such thing as seniority. There's no respect for experience. And trust me on this, it's like as a cusp boomer surrounded by the Zoomers and the millennials, I was treated like shit. And it's not just me. It's not just because they didn't like Mookie. It's like there's absolutely zero fucking respect for experience and seniority in American business. It just doesn't exist unless it's a family-owned business and you get fired if you don't chew with your mouth closed. In American business, the millennials and the Zoomers shit all over the Gen Xers and the boomers. They're just in the way. So that said, there's a paradox because even though us old farts are getting shit all over, we nonetheless wield a lot of money and power, and the age range for doing shit is through the roof. You could be 75 years old and jog a marathon and no one blinks at you. No one cares. You could be 75 years old and just gunning it, like, athletically. You could be in your business. No one really cares. So, the young people look at you contemptuously and you're in the way. But if you are wielding power and demonstrating confidence, we're if you eat well and you exercise, live to 90, live to 100. There's this expectation of longevity and extended life and extended quality of life, even though the pandemic and Oxycontin and now fentanyl and now fucking mental illness and depression is lowering, especially for men, especially for younger men, right? Median age. The converse is also true, which is if you're not self-defeating and you adopt healthy habits, 80, 90, no big deal. So back to your original question, summarize. Dear young writer, artist, number 1, kick ass, work hard, expect to grind, grind, grind. You will never discover your own strengths and style until you put in that Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. Now, he's gotten heat for that 10,000 hours. My answer to that is F off. Malcolm is correct. Minimum 10,000 hours. Absolute minimum. Now, if you're at 2,000 hours and you're faking it until you're making it, okay, that's my second point. Do your 10,000 hours, but along the way, don't stop marketing yourself and connecting with people to get out of this hole of being the starving artist. You don't have to be a starving artist. That's my bad. But that's part of my personality. So number 1, kick ass, work hard, grind. Number 2, while you're kicking ass, working hard, and grinding, fake it till you make it, and don't be shy about your shit. And number 3, love what you do. Because if you don't, like this last 3 weeks, 4 weeks of grinding on this book, it's been nuts, totally crazy. I just didn't exercise. I wasn't sleeping. It was just awesome. if if you're in the shitter and grinding and hating it, then just don't do it. Don't do it, because go into investment banking, for fuck's sakes. Why don't you just buy crypto? You know what I mean? Why are you writing if you don't love it? Is my last piece of advice. So grind, fake it till you make it, and love what you do, and you're going to be in it to win it.
Thank you so much. That was my last question, and thank you for taking the time to share about your book and your writing process. I've enjoyed the
Well, I just want to personally thank you too, and I want, whether this book, just flares out and is a vanity project, or whether it actually moves the needle and is popular, whether you see this as a Netflix miniseries or not. I want to thank you personally, because again, it's no exaggeration. I didn't ask you to review it. I mentioned that I'm intensely working on this. You saw that there was a stack of paper. You casually just looked over and started flipping through it, and you got absorbed. So that says something for my writing, but I think even more than that, it says something for your eagerness to participate and help out, and your attention to detail, and your humanity, and also frankly being female helped, because you gave me the assurance that I wasn't completely full of shit, because frankly a majority of my characters are female, or non-binary, transgender, and you're also character driven. So your questions, when you put them together, you asked me nothing about the science fiction, and you asked me everything about the writing process and the characters, until like 3/4 of the way through, when I even brought it up that there are parts of the book which are more technical and more thematic, and you asked me about that too. But you know what I mean? That's the hate part. That's like, here's an idea, the end. They nonetheless fit in thematically, so I at least snuck them in there, and you'll get to the characters and their interaction. Again, spoiler alert, whether it's the evolved dinosaur Quartz Leibniz, the managing director of the all-powerful agency, whether it's Grand Admiral Xavier Xerxes of the quintillionth and first Hypertrooper Division, right? This is like a MacArthur Truman animosity, and I'm going to get into that. And you've got 2 to the 31st minus 1, the Mercine kitty cat, who has 275 billion brothers and sisters, because the king and queen of their home world trusted nobody and decided that the only citizenry that would be worthy of them would be their own clones. So they clone every single possible brother and sister from their DNA, and those become the citizens of their world. And they are the royal family. So these are abstract concepts, but it's rough enough. Like you are you're the middle sister, right?
yes,
In your family.
yes,
So they're finding more and more, more and more psychology is done, where the ordering of your placement. Penny in the novel is the youngest sister, and she's got the classic youngest sister syndrome, right?
yeah. I
She's got
definitely
she's
have.
got the doctor and the lawyer who are older than her, and she's been underneath their shadow her whole life.
I have the middle siblings syndrome.
Syndrome, right?
Definitely.
So imagine having 275
Yeah.
billion. So that fits the Infiniverse theme
Yeah.
too, which is everything is, so again, infinite possibility, ginormous numbers, a sense of losing your humanity and individuality in this big mess, And then I'm gonna also introduce, spoiler alert, a character who's two-dimensional. Literally, his name is Dudney, as an homage to A.K. Dudney, who wrote a book called The Planiverse. And you're introduced to these, like, his name is A. Kiwatan Dudney, and the creatures in the book are the Kiwatans, and they are two-dimensional and they attack the base that goes on in the book, and he becomes a member of the team. So that's interesting too, which is the perspective of somebody who's literally flat like a sheet of paper.
Yeah, they show up a little bit in this first book.
In the first book, right?
Yeah,
Right.
I remember reading about that.
Right. Well, there's going to be a whole character who's that.
Okay.
So there's going to be fun in store for people who are more interested, and the fun is actually only just beginning.
And I really enjoyed reading the book and editing it. It was quite an experience.
Well, thank you, and I thank you for your assistance in doing that. And it's nice to have a partner in crime who's editor, commenter, and co-podcaster now. So this was a really fun interview process. So thanks so much, and more to come, folks. If you have any questions, comments, there's a link in the description where you can reach out directly to me. Thank you for listening to the No Hair, All Heart podcast. I think this is the world record at almost 2 hours, or more than 2 hours, 2.5 hours. If you've made it this far, gesundheit, right on, as Jonnie would say. And check out the book. As Michelle mentioned, it's on Amazon. You can just do a search, Fazoolie, Fazoolie. I'm going to put the link in the description. I'll also put the original short story, Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine, from January 2021, which will actually give you some spoilers in terms of what's lurking ahead. And thanks for listening. And I'm eager for any and all feedback. And be on the lookout for the next book, which will be second in a series of 5, at least as far as I can tell right now. Thank you so much for listening.